Clemson's season-defining game against the Florida State Seminoles is this Saturday at noon on ABC. To break it down, we've already talked to Matt Golden from Shaking the Southland. Now we're bringing in Tim Alumbaugh from Tomahawk Nation. Tim, thanks for joining.
Hey, Ryan. Thanks so much for having me, man.
Hey, so really fascinating game. We got a lot of different points to get to on it. Before we totally dive into the game, one thing that's really fascinated me is Florida State's really unique roster construction and roster management style. So I want to start kind of big picture there, and we'll focus in and get a prediction at the end. But we're talking a little bit before we started recording, but they've basically totally subverted the recruiting ranking system. They've basically gotten a lot of 3-star guys like Jeremiah Byers, who's a 3-star, low 3-star, even a 2 by some metrics, went to UTEP, but he proved them wrong and or developed, and they brought him in later as a 4-star transfer. Braden Fisk was a guy who could have went to Western Michigan or Illinois State, went to Western Michigan, sort of either proved him wrong or developed to the point where he's a stud, and then you bring him in. You don't really invest a whole lot of investment in terms of years on scholarship. So you bring them in, they're ready to go. So that's great. And I guess 2 questions come out of all that is, one, they're a much older team. On offense, they're on average 22, whereas Clemson on average, the starters are 19. So it's a 3-year age advantage there. On the flip side, after this year, you're going to lose a ton of them. And I don't know that you've built the high school recruiting pipeline. Maybe you have, but is the plan just to go back and just do this again every year? If so, how viable is all that?
Yeah, I think in the new age of college football, I think it is viable to an extent. What I think Mike Norvell is doing at Florida State is he's doing a lot of patchwork building. The roster that he inherited from Taggart and even the latter part of Jimbo Fisher, they were just terrible rosters. They were terrible classes. So they didn't have a lot of players. And honestly, I do wonder without the portal if Norvell would even still be here. Because
great point.
Just bringing in youth, at that time, the NLI was not there. His first year was COVID. So his first class was not great as well. And most of those guys, I think there's only a handful that are impactful players still. So he had the disadvantage of the roster. He had the disadvantage of COVID. And he had to somehow rebuild the upper ranks of the classmen at Florida State. And luckily for him, the transfer portal happened. And so what I think is happening is Florida State is slowly rebuilding from the ground up with recruiting. This year, the class, if it holds together, has some great players. 5-star Landon Thomas, 5-star KJ Bolden, Cam Davis, several others. Couple that with last year's class with some of the studs they had there. And I think they're slowly starting to rebuild with the idea that the transfer portal then just fills the gaps. And so because I think long-term viable, you can't build your entire team out of the portal as they've almost done.
Yeah, it's not quite Colorado, but 9 out of 11 starters on offense. I mean, that's incredible.
Right. And your most impactful players on defense, Fabian Lovett, Braden Fisk, Jared Verse, Tatum Bethune, Central Cypress, they're all portal guys. Last year, Jamie Robinson, portal guy. So I think what you're seeing is Norvell took advantage of the transfer portal to supplement what was a very bad roster, so that he could compete and in this point, actually excel. And then I think you'll start seeing the number of people out of the portal start to drop off. They've got a quarterback room built up. It wouldn't shock me to see at least like maybe a 1-year QB transfer next year, with Travis leaving, because I don't know if Duffy's ready. Brock Glenn hurt his hand. So, we'll see what happens there. But I think you finally stacked your QB room. Your running back room is finally stacked up behind, Trey Benson. Rodney Hill's great. Singleton last year. Cam Davis committed this year. Linemen, I still think they'll probably hit the portal hard on offensive linemen because that's a hard room to build, but they are supplanting there, from the high school ranks. So, instead of 7, 8 portal players each year, I think you might start seeing like 3 to 5. And like, let's say you need an impact safety next year, you'll start seeing just more of the plugs instead of the complete rebuild.
So are you concerned that their kind of expertise in the portal and their reputation for it will make it harder to recruit high school? Or is it more just they're a winner now, people want to play for a winner, problem solved?
Yeah, it's funny you say that. Miami's 24/7 site did a nice passive article a couple of weeks ago of how Miami plays the most freshman snaps last year or the last couple of years. And then they kind of compared them to their rivals. And Florida State was one of the lowest as far as freshman snaps. So really doing that negative recruiting of, hey, why would you want to go to Florida State? They don't play their freshmen. And to an extent, they're not wrong. But Florida State's freshmen over the last, I won't say last year, but the year, 2 years before that, 3 years before that, they weren't great. There were a lot of, hey, we're coming off a bad year. We got to take some guys with potential and guys that have to be in the weight room for 2 years and they have to develop. So they were absolutely right. But you're already seeing freshmen like Conrad Hussey getting snaps at safety and other players like that getting the opportunity this year. Rodney Hill he redshirted last year, but he played a lot in the games that he did participate. So I think there is that aspect of negative recruiting. However, with the NIL, the battle's edge that Florida State has really helped them to start getting an edge in recruiting with the freshmen. So I think you'll start to see that narrative change, but it's definitely out there.
Gotcha. And one last thing on this and this is a kind of good one to start pivoting into the game. So I mentioned they're 3 years older on average, the starters on offense versus Clemson. Is that an immediate advantage? I mean, are you seeing ways that's helping a lot?
Yeah, I think so. One of our writers said in our recruiting threads, or even on some of our recruiting podcasts, Florida State has noticed that coming in second in recruiting isn't a bad thing anymore. Because like you said, now when these guys like Keon Coleman goes to Michigan State and develops and becomes kind of a stud, but needs to get more potential or a better quarterback, a better system. Florida State was second or even, second or third for him in recruiting. And so they've kind of let them go through the lumps. And now they're like, all right, now you've gone through the lumps. You've got the experience. Come here and be a star. But also you got players like Johnny Wilson at Arizona State who had a bad first year. And, a lot of people were down on him and Florida State's like, we're going to take a chance on him. And it paid off huge dividends. So
yeah, sure.
maybe those guys got to go through the rough patches, which most freshmen do. And Florida State's getting the advantage of avoiding the rough patches, letting them smooth over a lot of the stuff they need to work on. And then they're inheriting the better player. So I think it's an advantage in that you're already, like you said, you're getting a 21, 22-year-old already physically developed, already been in the playbook, already had an opportunity to see the speed of college players versus some of these high school kids that they got to catch up physically. They got to catch up on a speed aspect, and they've got to really adapt. So I do think it's a built-in advantage.
Well, with that, let's kind of dive into this matchup a bit more. So what's a spot, and we'll start positive from a Clemson perspective. What's a spot that you're worried about where Clemson might be able to exploit something, a weakness, or just where you see Clemson having a strength? And I don't mean like quarterback versus quarterback, but, wide receivers versus cornerbacks or O-line versus D-line, that sort of thing.
I mean, just Will Shipley. I'm not going to – I almost don't want to say anything else. I mean, he torched Florida State last year. I think he had been hurt right before the Florida State game, and it was kind of his coming out party against Florida State. But, I really worry about the size of, the experience of Clemson's offensive line. And Florida State's got a good defensive line, but Boston College, they manhandled Florida State at times up front. And so I think Shipley's going to potentially be able to get those hard yards that they need to get. What I'm really curious about is Cade's running ability. Not that, I mean, he's not Castellanos, he's not Jaden Davis, but Florida State's really struggled with the motion aspect of, if I know that running back, or if I know that quarterback can run, I've got a key on him. The linebackers are triggering way too soon, and the misdirection or the formations there have really tripped up Florida State's linebacking core. So all of that to say, I think if you can get to Florida State's second level, I think that's where Clemson can really have a positive advantage. Whether that's Antonio Williams, whether that's Will Shipley, whether that's Klubnik using his eyes, I think that's the advantage.
It's interesting you say that, because I wrote an article and suggested that is going to be a key, and then I had Matt Golden from Shaken Southland on, and he suggested it as well. It's going to be really interesting to see. I mean, he's fast. Cade Klubnik's fast, but he hasn't run a ton this year. And of course, his most memorable run was when he slid on fourth down. It was a targeting, but it was a turnover on down. So it was basically the play Clemson lost to Duke on. But he's fast, and if Garrett Riley can drop some plays for him, I do think that's a huge key. All right, let's flip it around. More positive from your perspective. What's an area where you think Florida State might be able to exploit Clemson?
I think Keon Coleman and Johnny Wilson. I know Clemson's secondary struggled a little bit last year, but I know they've got players back, and I know they've got the experience. So I'm curious to see how that secondary lines up. For whatever reason, against Boston College, Florida State was just bound and determined to throw challenged vertical shots all day long. I have no idea why. It wasn't working. Boston College kind of knew it was coming, and Jordan Travis didn't have the best throwing game as well. But I think we saw against LSU. I think we saw, even though superior, or not Florida State, the superior team in SMU. Keon Coleman is a game changer, and if Clemson allows him and Travis to kind of get that connection, I think it can literally turn the game over, because Florida State can become explosive. Florida State can score fast. Against Boston College, it went from like a 10-10 game to 31-10 in a flash.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So, I mean, Florida State's got that potential. Johnny Wilson had a bad game against SMU, but had a great game against Boston College. And so if you have both of those guys clicking, I know we haven't seen it as much, but Winston Wright, I think, can, show up. If Florida State will ever truly use Destin Hill, I think that's a potential area. So I think the wide receivers is where Florida State potentially has the advantage in this game.
I also wanted to ask you specifically about Toafili. I've watched Florida State's both their, real games basically, and he shines, man. He's good. Is he a guy they can go to on that outside run? I feel really good about Tyler Davis and Rook kind of plugging up the middle, but are they going to be able to get out on the edge and force the defensive ends to set an edge and take advantage when they don't?
So it's funny you mentioned the running back room, because I don't feel like Trey Benson's been great this year. He's been hesitant for whatever. But Toafili and Rodney Hill have been the running backs that have shown out more. Rodney is really the guy that can bounce it outside, in my opinion. There was a couple runs against Boston College where the middle was plugged up. Hill got outside and got the first down. But I think it was last year, I think Toafili caught the wheel route against Clemson, kind of somersaulted over the back of a Clemson guy, stayed in bounds, and ended up in the end zone. I think it was Clemson. But to me, that's where Toafili can really take advantage. Yes, he's quick around the edge. Yes, he gets really skinny in the middle of that line. But getting him one-on-one against a backer on a wheel route or in the flats, and getting him out in the open, where it's just him one-on-one, I think that's where Toafili really has the opportunity to shine.
Gotcha. So if you had asked me on Friday, prior to last week's games, I'd pick Florida State to win by multiple touchdowns, and I had no hope. I wrote an article, and it was entitled "Hope is a Dangerous Thing," referencing Shawshank. And now I'm like, I don't know if I'm picking Clemson to win, but I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, Clemson looked awesome against FAU, and Florida State did not against Boston College. I know BC is better than FAU, but I don't really know this by much. How much did last week's games change your perspective on this?
Yeah, so I'll give some caveats, and I hate caveats. So I don't want these to be excuses, but there were rumors that half of Florida State's team was battling COVID-like symptoms or flu-like symptoms. Several players were seen with masks on after the game, down to offensive linemen. And honestly, if you go watch that game, Florida State's offensive game plan is just super vanilla. Like I said, every pass play was just a vertical shot down the field, and it was just and they were just bound to determine. There were several first downs that were left wide open because Jordan Travis wanted to throw a sideline route to Keon Coleman.
Yeah,
a challenge. So I think Florida State repped Clemson probably 2 weeks in a row. From the time they beat LSU till now, I think they've been repping Clemson. I think they overlooked Boston College. I think running quarterbacks give them fits. And it was the red bandana game. All of that to say is, man, what an awful performance on Saturday by Florida State. All around, there were mistakes all over the field. And so I think if you came out of the LSU game on a super high, like Florida State's going to go undefeated, they're going to make the playoffs, I think you've got to really notch it down and say, this is a losable game on Saturday. Games against Wake Forest in Miami and Florida are no longer like we're going to be the heavy favorites. Those are games that are, I think, going to be challenges. So I think it has to bring you down until Florida State proves you different. So definitely impacted my feelings of the game Saturday. I'm a pessimistic fan anyways. I've been through those rough Florida State years. So I think the game is a toss-up, to be honest with you. And I think what really sticks out is I don't know the true Clemson, and I don't know the true Florida State. Is Florida State truly the team that blew out LSU in the second half? Or are they more what we saw sleepwalking through SMU, sluggish against Boston College? Whereas is Clemson the team against Duke that somehow pulled off a miracle second half with no punts or scores? or are they the team that just obliterated FAU in the first half and Charleston Southern in the second half?
Right.
I don't know. And so I think we're going to get a lot of answers potentially on Saturday in this matchup.
So as a Clemson fan watching that game, it's not that I necessarily wanted Florida State to lose, but I wanted 47 overtimes, everyone exhausted. And I didn't quite get that, but Jordan Travis got banged up. Jaheim Bell got banged up. There were several guys.
Yeah.
Any big losses that have already come out, recording as of Tuesday, but early in the week, any big news already?
Yeah, so the depth chart that Florida State released is basically the same depth chart that they've had since the beginning of the season.
So they're not saying anything.
Yeah, so I think you've added some oars in there or something like that. So I expect Jordan Travis to play. I expect at this point the full offensive line to be ready. Robert Scott, Maurice Smith, both of them. My biggest question mark is Akeem Dent, the safety, and because he missed the Boston College game. I think he got hurt against SMU, if I'm remembering correctly. And I think safety is the area that we have the worst depth. That Florida State has the worst depth, in my opinion. They moved Kevin Knowles over there this past season. They should have gone to the transfer portal and got another safety. They should have
never go to the portal, huh?
Yeah. They should have pushed harder for the kid that went to Alabama. I think his last name was Keys. But I think that's their biggest issue. And if Akeem Dent is out again, although I don't think Akeem Dent is like great, he's a difference maker on defense because he knows where to be, where Kevin Knowles doesn't always know where to be. He's not the surest of tacklers. A lot of the breakdowns that occurred against Boston College on Saturday, Knowles was in some way part of that. So Akeem Dent's my biggest question mark right now. Everybody else, as far as I know, should be playing.
All right, before we get to final predictions, folks, thank you so much for watching this video. If you're not already subscribed, please do so. We got a lot more content like this, so give it a subscribe. It really helps grow the channel. All right, Tim. I know you said it's a toss-up, but if you're willing, you can give a score. If not, you can keep it more vague. But what's your thoughts on how this game goes down? And let me say this: what do you think is going to happen, and how confident are you that that's going to be the case?
So I said I'm a pessimistic Florida State fan. I picked LSU to win. In my mind, I'm still a baseball kid at heart, and I think I'm gonna jinx myself if I pick Florida State to win. But I think Florida State should win. I'm not super confident in that. I could see a similar game to LSU, where it's very tight in the first half, and then Florida State potentially comes out like gangbusters and kind of runs away with it in the second half. I think there's potential for that. Not that Florida State's so much better than Clemson. I think this is a very winnable game for Clemson. I just think Florida State potentially has the opportunity for more explosive plays that will end up giving them the win if they've truly just been repping Clemson for the last 3 weeks. So I could see something like 34-24, 34-28, something like that. But my confidence level in that, it's not very high. So please don't in any way take me as a homer columnist here or reporter or whatever you want to say. I think this is a very winnable game for Clemson. I just think right now, when Florida State's clicking on all cylinders, they're better than Clemson clicking on all cylinders.
Well, we'll find out Saturday. Thank you, Tim, for joining us. We appreciate it. Folks, you can check him out over on Tomahawk Nation. Thanks again, man. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Ryan. Thanks for having me on, and good luck this season.
Thanks.